So after the flood, we end up with this character, Nimrod. I call him the post-flood man of many names. And in the two timeline charts that I developed regarding that time period, the 350 post-flood years of Noah's life, I start tracing, who came from who and the overlaps. It is neat. I guess Zach has a graphic also showing the overlaps of who lived, at the same time as somebody else. And it is really interesting when you see it visually, who they had access to for information. And after I did this timeline chart right here, I wanted to unpack that a little bit more. And I made this one because I realized there are two characters that show up about the same time. Nimrod shows up first, and then Abraham as Abram. And they are big time rivals. I mean, this is where it really, L.A. Marzulli has a book called The Cosmic Chess Match. And the idea behind the book is basically, God makes a move, the devil makes a move. This whole move and counter move kind of cosmic chess match taking place. And I thought that was a brilliant way of illustrating it, this whole idea of a cosmic chess match. These are the two main players on the board, as far as I'm concerned, Nimrod and Abraham. And of course, you have the Tower of Babel. Nimrod creates the Tower of Babel, and we see in Genesis 11 that the whole earth was of one language. They're all gathered together in the plains of Shinar, and they're building this thing. And it says in King James, "Let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And it says that God comes down there, he checks out what they're doing. He gets upset about it, and he makes a statement. He says, nothing will be restrained from that which they have imagined to do. That's an extraordinary statement. He's not just saying, oh no, they know how to build buildings. That's scary. If you get into what they had actually imagined to do, and we will in a second here, you can understand why God did what he did. Now, part of what they intended to do was kill God, which I don't believe is possible. Not possible to kill God, but the other things that they intended to do, his statement right there seems to imply that it was at least theoretically possible for them to do so. Now, if you've listened to any of my previous teachings prior to about 2.5 years ago, regarding the Tower of Babel, I always said it was not about height, right? I said, if it was really about height, if you're trying to build a tall tower to get into, and start on a mountain or something, you don't build it in the plains. I mean, that'd be stupid, right? So therefore, it must be a Stargate. Right? They're trying to rend the veil, they're creating a Stargate so they can go from this realm and go through the Stargate and get into heaven. And there are a lot of people out there still teaching that. I taught it and was pretty passionate about it. And then it's just like this, walking in Torah. Before we should have BT before Christ, but before Torah, BT, right? In my BT life, there's so many things that we read right past, read right over. I even underlined and annotated stuff and didn't get it. And then, after Torah, I look at it and go, wow, how did I miss that? Well, I mean, it's the same thing with some of this other stuff that I'm looking at here. And I've even published the book. I got Jubilees back there and some of these other ones. And I look in these things for more detail about the Tower of Babel and see things like this. And they built it 43 years they were building it. And it also says there's about 600,000 men at the time. So there's a pretty decent population. Its breadth was 203 bricks, and the height of a brick was a third of one. Its height amounted to 5,433 cubits and 2 palms. The extent of one wall was 13 stades, and of the other 30 in Jubilees 10:21. Note, 5,433 cubits equals 8,150 feet. Another guy I stumbled across, his research, Alfred Edersheim, wrote a book, Bible History, Old Testament, chapter 8. He says, of the magnificence of Babel, the capital of the empire of Nimrod, the mighty hunter, it is difficult to convey an adequate conception without entering into details foreign to our purpose. But some idea of it may be formed from its extent, which according to the lowest computation covered no less than 100 square miles. We're talking the base of the tower, while the highest computation would make it over 200 square miles. Well, now all of a sudden I'm going, well, no wonder they built it in the plains of Shinar. They needed a big enough space to build a base for a building that big. That's one huge structure. Joshua even goes so far to tell you that it took a year to get to the top of the thing. And they were building, making the bricks and stuff like that. And if a brick fell, man, everybody was upset. They would mourn the brick. But if a dude a guy fell down, nobody cared. Because it was a big labor that they were going through there. And it says in the Joshua account, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. Goes into greater detail and says all these people and all their families divided themselves into 3 parts. The first said, we will ascend to heaven and fight against him. The second said, we will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, we will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And God knew their works and all their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And then it goes on to say how he was upset about it and confounds their language. So their plan was, they had 3 camps to get in there and take out the angels, take out the throne room, get rid of God and set up their own gods, and presumably Nimrod to be king of the everything. So we pick up in Genesis, right? He confounds the languages. Now, if you look through lots of ancient Hebrew literature, you'll see that they believe that there were 70 different languages that came out of the Tower of Babel, 70 different nations. I believe Hebrew was the original language, the language of God, and I believe through Abraham, the language of Hebrew was retained. And then you got 69 other people groups speaking 69 other languages. And in the cosmic chess match scenario, I see sort of like this vision of God saying to Satan, okay, you want to take me on? Fine. I'll give you 69. I'll take 1. Give it your best shot. And then you have all these people going off with different languages, 69 different languages, talking about the same guy who was their former leader. But now his character becomes known by a number of different names through different cultures. These are just a few. Gilgamesh, Baal, Melkart, Adonis, Dumuzi, Dionysus, Bacchus, Mithra, Orion, Apollo, Tammuz, Osiris. And when you study these characters, and there are others out there, and I got to give credit where credit is due. Peter Goodgame was the first person that I read to put a lot of these parallels together and showing the synchronicities and stuff. And that's what's got me started down the path. Once I went down that path, you start seeing characteristics of these gods, and many of them are almost identical. And you start saying, well, they're too similar to not be the same, and even in the way they're depicted often. So these are just a few that I tend to focus on. And I believe this helps us to identify the beast. Now, this, thus saith the Lord, this is thus thinketh Rob, looking at the text. Because I believe the scriptures tell us everything we need to know. Amos 3:7, God says, I'm not going to do anything except to tell the prophets first what I'm going to do. So you have Yeshua saying that the last days are going to be such that there's never been a time like it, and there never will be a time ever again like it. It's the most significant time in all of human history, the end times. So do you think he's going to leave us hanging concerning the identity of the characters that are going to play a part in the last days? I don't. I think he's going to tell us exactly who we're dealing with. So that's the premise that I launched my research with, and takes us to a section I call Identifying the Beast. And there are lots of scriptures that talk about the end times tyrant, the Assyrian, the beast, the lawless one, the Antichrist. I'm going to kind of work backwards. Look at Revelation 17:8-11. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Stop. Where does the beast come from? So he's not coming from Hawaii or Kenya or the United Nations or New York or the Vatican. How many have you heard one or all of those is where the beast is, the Antichrist is coming? He's coming from the European Union. He's coming from the Vatican. He's coming from Kenya. Everybody knows Obama's the Antichrist. I mean, we have a very Amero-centric view of prophecy sometimes. It's like every president we've had is a candidate for the Antichrist. I mean, I don't vote. I don't believe in the system. If you see my Babylon Rising material, you know why. It's just the whole thing's rigged for one thing. But I was kind of just sitting back going, I wonder what's going to happen if Hillary gets in. Because I want to see all the eschatology guys out there tap dancing to explain why she's going to be the Antichrist. Because somebody's going to do it. Our president's always got to be the Antichrist. It says he's coming from the bottomless pit. I'm not going to look anywhere else but there. That's what the scriptures say. This is an open book test. Where does the beast come from? The bottomless pit. Okay. And he will go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that Was and is not and yet is. That's interesting. We see that a few times, don't we? The one who was and is not and yet shall be. How is Yeshua referred to in the beginning of the book? The one who was and is to come. So we have an antithesis here. The one who was and is not, but yet shall be. And here's the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads, we've got this weird beast. This is one of those situations where I believe if it's going to speak in allegorical, metaphorical, symbolic terms, you need to, look at it and see, does a character show up to explain it? Otherwise, can I take it literally or should I take it as a metaphor? Well, here we've got a symbol. We've got this beast with 7 heads. You have this angel showing up to explain it. He says the beast that he had seen, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. We've just been given an enormous amount of detail to understand who this character is right here. Now, you'll notice it says kings. That's because the word that's used there is the word, the word in English, kings, is basileus, Strong's number 935. It's defined as a king, ruler, emperor, etc. John did not use the closely related word basileus, Strong's number 932, which means a kingship, sovereignty, kingdom. A lot of people who teach on end times always want to make this kingdom. These are 7 kingdoms. It says kings. Use the word for kings, individuals, people. 5 people have fallen. Yes, now people rule kingdoms. So when they fell, maybe their kingdoms fell, but the focus here is on 5 people because we're trying to identify the beast, who is an 8th, but is of the 7, right? Because he was, is not currently, but yet shall be. So thinking about people throughout biblical history who had Antichrist-like characteristics, Peter Goodgame put together a list that after I looked through it and saw his reasoning for it, agreed with, and with slight variations, but he reasoned 5 had fallen. Thinking about people in the Bible that have Antichrist-like characteristics, you have Nimrod, obviously. He creates a one world, the New World Order, there's nothing new about it. It's just a rerun, especially when you consider everything about the New World Order and the all-seeing eye and the back of your dollar bill and all of that stuff, all goes back to worship of Osiris. Secret societies are all about Osiris. And if Osiris is Nimrod, well, there you go. There's nothing new under the sun. He's obviously a great type for Antichrist. The Pharaoh of Egypt at the time of the Exodus thought himself to be a god, decided to wipe out God's people. Great candidate. Sennacherib, same thing, Assyrian, thought himself a god, decided to try to wipe out God's people. The angel, he goes home, and the angel of the Lord wipes out, I think it was 180,000 troops in one night or something like that. Interesting character. King of Tyre, you start reading about him. It starts off talking about a man, but then the description spins off into characteristics of Satan. So clearly he has some kind of affiliation with the devil. Antiochus Epiphanes, now he would be in, depending on your Bible, would be in what, if you have your 66 book King James, you would say it's in the intertestament period. If you have the original King James, which had 80 books, you can read the Maccabees and see that he is there as a character who, if you know the account, he went into the temple and set up a statue of Zeus on December 25th, incidentally, offered up a pig. And actually Maccabees, I think it's 1 Maccabees 4, if I'm not mistaken, tells you point blank that the act of bringing a pig into the temple and sacrificing it there was called the abomination of desolation. That's what it's called, bringing a pig into the temple. And as soon as we were reading this, Sheila says to me, she goes, wow, so what does that mean if we bring pig into our temple? Just food for thought. Alexander the Great is another interesting character that I could consider as an alternative to number 5. You look at his life and what he did. He's the he-goat in the book of Daniel. And it says that he has a little horn between his eyes. And the little horn is the first king. I'm going, well, what's the first king? It was not the first king of Greece or anything else at that time. If it's representing the first king that we have any record of, biblically speaking, is Nimrod. So it seemed that he had done whatever he did in the similar rebellious fashion as Nimrod, to me anyway. The one that now is, at the time of John, that depends on when you think is, as Bill Clinton would say. What's the definition of is? Really, dude? That depends on when you think John wrote the book of Revelation. Some people believe that he wrote it before the destruction of the temple. Some people believe that he wrote it after the destruction of the temple. 90 AD is what I was raised to believe. Either way, you end up with a Caesar. It's either Nero or Domitian. Either one are good candidates. They always thought they were gods and certainly persecuted God's people. And then we read about one that will come, but his reign will be short. And I think a reasonable case could be made for Adolf Hitler. And I think a lot of people that lived during that time probably thought they were living in the tribulation. Speculation, of course. Let's look at Revelation 13 now. Somebody mentioned the deadly wound. Well, we got to keep this all in the same context. We're talking about the beast here. It says, and I saw one of the heads of the beast with 7 heads, as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Okay, so if we accept this list as a reasonable list for what's spoken of in Revelation 17, let's see who had a mortal head wound. Well, Nimrod did. According to Joshua, Esau cut his head off. That's a head wound. Pharaoh at the time of Egypt did not. Sennacherib did not. King of Tyre did not. Antiochus Epiphanes, no. Alexander the Great, no. Nero, sort of. It said that he stabbed himself in the throat, and by the Hebrew reckoning, you might consider that part of the head proper. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that he's a candidate. And according to history, supposedly Hitler shot himself in the head, although recent forensic evidence says otherwise, that the skull was actually that of a female and that he escaped to either Antarctica or Argentina, but that's a whole other seminar. So when you look at other definitions for the Antichrist throughout Scripture, especially the Old Testament, one of the phrases or one of the terms you hear most often is the Assyrian. The Assyrian in the last days. Which one of these guys is an Assyrian? It's all you got left by process of elimination. And then you look at Revelation 13:4, and they worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? That is very similar to a statement in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, Gilgamesh being one of the stories about this character. Who can compare with him? Kingliness. Who can say like Gilgamesh, I am king? The concept there is, whoa, who's like this guy? And he was a giant. In fact, if you go back to the narrative in Genesis chapter 9, is it 9 or 10? 9 or 10, I think it's 10, when it's talking about, 10, the Table of Nations, and talking about Nimrod. It says that Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. That's what you get in King James. If you look up the word mighty one, it's Gabor, plural being Gaborim. That word can be translated as giant. In fact, in the Septuagint, it is translated as giant. It says Nimrod began to become a giant. Now, both definitions are correct, mighty one or giant. Both are applicable to the word Gabor, Gaborim. But David had mighty men too, didn't he? And David, he was out there with his mighty men out killing giants. So what's the difference? Well, this is where I see value in using something like the Septuagint, because you have the Hebrew scholars with their Hebrew language and their Hebrew context. They know the context of their history and everything. They translated the exact same word, Gabor or Gaborim, 2 different ways, depending on who we're talking about. When it was talking about Genesis 6, giants, it used gigantus, from which we get the word gigantic or giant. In the case of Nimrod, the same word, gigantus, word we use for giant. David's mighty men, ton dynatos, which basically means strong, powerful warrior. So they knew the difference. The word began has a sexual connotation to it. It's used the same word that is translated as began in King James, began to become, is translated elsewhere as sexual defilement and prostitution. So looking at the text, it appears that through some sort of sexual ritual, I would say, he defiled himself, and it changed him in such a way that he began to become a giant. That's in the canonized text. When you look in the other texts, you see these characters are also giants, like Gilgamesh. So let's go with that premise. Let's compare Nimrod with Yeshua. Well, we know that Yeshua is the Son of God, right? And he was also manifest as flesh, as man, right? Gilgamesh was said to be 1/3 man and 2/3 God, 1/3 being 33.33%, and 2/3 being what? 6, okay, just checking. All right. As Osiris, he was known as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's a familiar title. As Osiris, Mithra, Tammuz, etc., his symbol was a cross. In the Egyptian, it'd be the Ankh, which the hoop in the Ankh represents resurrection. Interesting. He's depicted throughout multiple cultures as a dying and resurrecting figure. Of course, as Apollo and some of these other ones, as the Son of God, in that case, Zeus, which is interesting because Zeus is referred to basically as Satan in the book of Revelation, where it talks about Pergamum, and they had the altar of Satan there. Well, the altar of Satan was the altar of Zeus that was in Pergamum, that was relocated during World War II to Berlin. Interesting. And Obama created a replica of the seat of Satan for his Denver, Colorado acceptance speech. That's when everybody's like, he's the Antichrist, he's the Antichrist. Like, no. For some reason, I just have a hard time accepting the fact that the Antichrist needs a teleprompter to address the sixth graders. Not that impressed. Who is like that? Who can make war with that? Yeah, it's not working for me. Rules from elsewhere. Of course, we have Yahuwah in heaven and Osiris as the god of the dead ruling from the underworld in Hades. Then we have the Antichrist mentioned by name in Revelation chapter 9. Where does the beast come from? Open book test, right? We saw that, the bottomless pit. Beast comes from the bottomless pit. When is the bottomless pit opened? At the fifth trumpet, Revelation chapter 9. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, or messenger, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, and in the Greek hath his tongue Apollyon. Apollyon is just a derivative spelling of Apollo. Scripture just told you who the Antichrist is by name. Where he comes from, everything. Apollo. It's Apollo. Revelation 9:11. 9:11, interesting also. His number is 666. Well, we talked about his being 1/3 man. Man is a carbon-based organism, so it is the number of a man, right? 666. Well, man, just by default, by the carbon molecule anyway, would be 666. 6 protons, 6 electrons, 6 neutrons. 2/3 God, 66.6%. This individual is known throughout the world by the depiction of an obelisk. I'm not going to get too graphic about why that is. If you read the Osiris myth, you'll understand that. Essentially, it's a big phallic symbol. We have the largest phallic symbol in the world, set up in Washington, D.C., as a big middle finger sticking up to God. It just so happens to be 6,666 inches tall by 666 inches wide. Probably just a coincidence, I'm sure. Speaking of coincidences, we also have another interesting one here. The spinning globe 666 and the strong delusion. Who sends the strong delusion? God does. Why? Go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The coming of the lawless one, the beast, the Antichrist, will be, and it's interesting that he's called the lawless one too, isn't it? Sheila's always like, if we're not supposed to be keeping the Torah, why does God make a big deal out of a lawless one? And all of our holidays, quote unquote, beast feasts, go back to this guy. December 25th, dying and resurrecting sun god of antiquity, all that stuff goes back to this guy. The lawless one. The people who are doing the Christmas and Easter, Xmas and Ishtar Day, are the same people typically that are arguing against what we're talking about here this weekend. Well, that all goes back to the lawless one. The coming of the lawless one will be accompanied by the power of Satan. He will use every kind of power, including miraculous signs, lying wonders. Ooh, look at the Hubble pictures from the space telescope. And every type of evil to deceive those who are dying, those who refuse to love the truth that would save them. For this reason, for the reason of people not wanting to believe the truth, it says God will send them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. Then all who have not believed the truth but have taken pleasure in unrighteousness will be condemned. So much of the globe model, and I'm going to show you this to you in a minute, points to the number 666 over and over and over again. This is about the lawless one, whose number is 666. Lots of signs and lying wonders, I believe, come from NASA on a regular basis. But by way of review, let's just go back and see what the scriptures have to say. And since I'm the village idiot, I'll let Dr. Michael Heiser start this off.
Proverbs 8, when he established the heavens, I was there when he drew a circle on the face of the deep. Circular. He made firm the skies above, so on and so forth. Here's an interesting one. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness.
How do you inscribe an orbit? Hold that thought. Let that one bounce around in your noodle for a while. We'll come back to it. When you consider the numerous scriptures that reference the heavenly luminaries in motion, and combine it with the many scriptures that describe the earth as being set on a firm foundation of pillars, fixed and not moving, plus the fact that Isaiah's circle was inscribed, if we were to employ the principle of Occam's razor, clearly the position that requires the fewest assumptions is that of the circular still flat earth. Everything else is wishful thinking at best. And that wishful thinking requires constant mental gymnastics, as we will see over the course of this series, in order to justify the spinning heliocentric globular Earth mentality. And once again, let's go to Bible.cc, shall we? And look at Isaiah 40:22. And I'm using this function right here. You can also use the parallel function right here for English. These are all the English Bible translations. Okay. New International, circle the earth. New Living Translation, circle the earth. English Standard, circle the earth. New American Standard, circle the earth. King James, circle the earth. Holman Christian Standard, circle of the earth. International, he who sits on the disk of the earth. Net Bible, oh, that's interesting. They come up with horizon, which is not what the word Hug means. New Heart English Bible, he who sits above the circle of the earth. God's Word Translation, enthroned above the earth. They just throw the word out all together, I guess. JPS Tanakh, 1917, Circle of the Earth. That's Jewish. That's the Jewish guys right there. They, might know their own language. Call me crazy. I know that's insane for me to suggest such a thing. But these Jewish scholars who took their own Hebrew scriptures and turned it into their English version, the JPS Tanakh Bible, they said circle of the earth. They didn't say reeling, rock and rolling, orbiting, spinning, globe sphere earth. They said circle of the earth. New American Standard, vault of the earth. That's interesting. They threw the word vault in there. Jubilee Bible 2000, circle of the earth. King James 2000, circle of the earth. American King James, circle of the earth. American Standard Version, circle of the earth. Dewey Rhymes Bible, upon the globe of the earth. Oh, that's interesting. Dewey Rhymes. Oh, that would be following on the heels of the Copernican Revolution, so that doesn't really surprise me, especially since this is a Catholic Bible.
Copernicus' theory of a heliocentric universe was well known at the upper strata of the Catholic Church in his lifetime. While he preferred his theories published after his death, he ultimately agreed to publish his manuscripts on the persistent appeals of high church officials. The necessity to change public conception from an accurate belief in a flat, enclosed earth to a false belief grew slowly. With sapient baby steps, the whole world would become amenable to the final delusion of an alien invasion under the First Woe. The Catholic hierarchy had the perfect opportunity to lay groundwork for a global deception to culminate in this Earth's final generation. This deception required a globe Earth spinning throughout the vast reaches of space inhabited by aliens and other sentient life forms. These contrivances created doubt in the Bible, putting science ahead of Scripture, which advises mankind the Earth is enclosed and unmoving. They also place the Creator far away from His creation by presenting a universe unimaginably vast. To engineer this transformation in belief, the newly created Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits, became the agents of change. Following Copernicus' publications, it is probable the Jesuit order has produced more astronomers than any other demographic in Europe. That, ostensibly, a religious order should produce so many scientists should cause surprise. However, as these scientists have focused nearly exclusively in but one area, this gives us reason to question. Upon rejection of the sacred scriptures, which teach us Earth is a fixed, immovable object under a protective covering, a nefarious foundation was laid. Atop this were built perversions designed to force humanity to doubt the very word of our Father Yahuwah. With the biblical geocentric model rejected, a new explanation was required. A globe Earth, its orbit of the sun for millions of miles every year, illimitable realms of space with billions of galaxies, each composed of billions of stars with worlds innumerable. All this became necessary to explain the new heliocentric model of the universe, and mankind, over a short time, lost his divine significance. Thereafter was created an environment within which the writings of Charles Darwin found a receptive audience. Once science showed the Bible wrong, the disparager then diverged from her religious guise altogether. Anything suddenly became possible. There was nothing above question, including how the Earth seemed to appear in the vastness of space with all else, and the existence of extraterrestrials. The Big Bang Theory is, today, the leading explanation about how the universe began. At its simplest, it talks about the universe as we know it, starting with a small singularity, then inflating over the next 13.8 billion years to the cosmos that we know today. Priest Andrew Pinsent holds advanced degrees in theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, as well as a doctorate in particle physics from Oxford. In January 2015, he wrote, "Being both a priest and a former particle physicist at CERN, I am often asked to give talks on faith and science. Quite often, young people ask me the following question: how can you be a priest and believe in the Big Bang? To which I am delighted to respond, we invented it. Or more precisely, priest Georges Lemaitre invented the theory that is today called the Big Bang, and everyone should know about him." The author of the Big Bang Theory was none other than the Jesuit-trained priest Georges Lemaitre. Follow from cause to effect. 1. Without a globe Earth circling the Sun through the far reaches of space, we do not have the Big Bang. 2. Without the Big Bang, we do not have evolution. 3. Without evolution, we are more likely to accept creation as an act of intelligent design by a divine creator. The Roman Catholic Church does, in fact, accept evolution.
So that's interesting. Darby translation, Circle of the Earth. English Revised Version, Circle of the Earth. Webster, Circle of the Earth. Captain Definition Man himself, circle. World English Bible, Circle of the Earth. Young's Literal Translation, Circle of the Earth. Okay, now let's get really crazy. Let's go ahead and click on multi. And go past the English. Check for yourself. Check multiple languages. Okay? They're all saying the same thing. And they're not saying anything about reeling and orbiting and rotating. Going in a circle. As in motion. They're describing a noun. A shape. Circle. Not sphere. None of these guys, except for Dewey Rhymes, came up with anything even remotely indicating a sphere here. Not one of them gave us any indication that Isaiah meant to say that the earth is spherical or revolving, reeling, orbiting, or in any other form of movement. Rather, they all indicated the simple, straightforward, circular nature of our world in the mind of the Holy Spirit-inspired authors of Scripture. Period. And while Dr. Michael Heiser may not agree with this personally himself, he doesn't believe the earth is circle, he believes the earth is a sphere, he at least has the intellectual honesty, the integrity to show what the biblical authors meant. And they didn't mean globe.
That's part of a video series I did called Theologians Gone Wild. In response to several guys out there that were saying, well, circle means it's talking about the orbit of the earth. And you know, anyway, that's all part of that. I'm not saying it is the strong delusion. I'm asking if it is. It's a pretty good candidate when you go through it. I just did a search the other day on my phone. I was just sitting there. What is the speed of this alleged orbit? Because I keep hearing this all the time. Well, no, circle. He's talking about that's the circle of the orbit of the Earth. That's what that whole video was in response to. And I'm like, okay, what is the speed of the Earth going around the sun, supposedly? And it's cleverly disguised as 18.5 miles per second when you search for it. 18.5 miles per second. So I'm like, 18.5 times 60 seconds times 60 minutes. 66,600 miles per hour. Interesting. Supposedly, this globe that we're on is 25,000 miles in circumference, which amounts to 8 inches per mile squared is the math. 8 inches, of course, being 0.666 of a foot. 10 miles being 66.666 feet. 100 being, you're getting to see a pattern here. The tilt of the Earth, I looked that up. Okay, the tilt of the Earth, 23.5 degrees, 23.4, depending on who you read. The sources that I looked at were government sources. They were saying 23.4. 23.4 off of center. If you have a 90-degree angle, 90 subtract 23.4, 66.6. It's probably all just a coincidence. Maybe it is. This other guy who believes in the globe, I know I'm crazy. I told you, don't believe me. Remember the slide with the tinfoil hat? Or let's just say things that make you go, This other guy who believes in the globe, it created this graphic, and I saw it on his website, godtype.com, and he was saying all of these distances in nautical miles from various points of on Antarctica to the Jerusalem, to the Vatican obelisk, to Washington, are 6,660 nautical miles. I'm like, okay, whatever. Godtype.com. It's up in the top corner there. He believes in the globe, and the tap dance he does around this to say that, that's whatever. I'm like, okay, dude, yeah, sure. The number of the beast is 666. Nimrod, again, was born in 1908 AM, year since creation. Just so happens to be, if you flash forward to 1908 AD, Ernest Shackleton boarded a ship called the Nimrod, and he heads down to Antarctica on the Nimrod expedition. Now, in the biblical account, Nimrod went up to try to get into the firmament. In 1908, if this model is true, it looks like they went out to get to the firmament towards the outer regions. Now, people are like, well, if it's flat Earth, how come we don't fall off the edge? Well, because it just so happens to be, if you Google coastline of Antarctica, you see 200 to 300 foot ice walls. That would be the outside of the circle, so to speak. If you look into the Enochian account of what happened to him when Enoch was not, for God took him, where did he take him? Joshua says he was taken in a place of snow and ice. So I'm going, okay, that's interesting. So Nimrod heads down to, Shackleton heads down on the Nimrod expedition. Many more Antarctic expeditions soon follow. In 1931, a guy named Auguste Piccard, who was a scientist, shoots himself up into the stratosphere. He got to nearly 52,000 feet, first guy to get that high, in a metal ball hanging from a balloon, and comes back describing, for Popular Science magazine no less, the Earth as a flat disk with upturned edges. That was his description of what he saw. During World War II, the Nazis become obsessed with the occult and Antarctica. Just look into the Nazis and what they were doing down there. After World War II, the rest of the world suddenly becomes obsessed with Antarctica as well. Is the stage being set for the return of the beast? I'm going to conclude with this. I talked about the return of the Watchers that were judged, bound, and buried for 70 generations. Is it just a coincidence that what happened in the 20th century? The return of the Nephilim, is it just a coincidence that we're seeing the hybridization taking place? Well, what about the return of the beast? We're expecting the return of Christ. I believe that there's going to be a return of Antichrist as well. If you remember the names that I had up there, Osiris being one of the references to Nimrod, one of the names he became known by. Well, the tomb of Osiris was found in 1999. Dr. Zahi Hawass said, I have found a shaft going 29 meters vertically down into the ground, exactly halfway between the Chevron pyramid and the Sphinx. At the bottom, which was filled with water, we have found a burial chamber with 4 pillars. In the middle is a large granite sarcophagus, which I expect to be the grave of Osiris, the god. I've been digging in Egypt's sand for more than 30 years, and up to date, this is the most exciting discovery I have made. This is what they found when they looked at it. This is an artist rendering of it. The red star is the location between the pyramid and the Sphinx. And then you came down into a large chamber, went down again, came down to an area that had 7 sarcophagus things, and another tunnel that went down even further, actually 6, with a 7th one going down. And then you have the artist depiction on the right there of what they found. Now, the sarcophagus was open. They did find a body inside of it. Everybody that looked at it and studied it did not believe that it was Osiris, but they were thinking that this may be what we might consider to be a resurrection chamber. And so what it appears is that somebody, maybe with the hopes of being resurrected, was loaded into this thing and it didn't work. But it's a very interesting find. You can look that up, study that for yourself. And in 2003, April 2003, coincidentally 1 month before we set up the military occupation phase in Iraq, and the first thing our troops did was raid the Museum of Iraq, and 170,000 items were reported stolen. Of those, most of them were returned. The ones that were not returned were about 3,000 items that all dealt with resurrection and the afterlife. Probably just a coincidence. That's right after they found the tomb of Gilgamesh. And if the stories are to be believed, the body was found, believed to be Gilgamesh, incredibly well preserved, and the primary objective was to extract DNA. So then we get to a warning from Yeshua in Matthew 24. He says, if any man say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. He says, behold, I have told you before. That's King James. Other translations make it sound like, hey, listen up. I'm about to tell you something. Remember what I've told you before? Think about it. If they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert. The body of Gilgamesh was pulled out of the desert in 2003. Go not forth. Behold, he's in the secret chambers. The secret chamber of Osiris was found in 1999. Believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. That's what we should be looking for. Those are the real signs. Any other signs pointing to a Christ, forget about it. This is what you need to pay attention to. And then he says, for wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. And I think Steve said, rightly so, there are many different ways people have looked at these passages. Lots of different interpretations. Here's one of mine. When you look into what the occult believes, and again, the Freemasons and the Illuminati and all the secret societies and stuff, the rituals are all revolved around a dying and resurrecting character. Many cases directly associated with Osiris. And Manly P. Hall is one of the most prolific writers of Freemasonry, said, whenever you see an eagle with a point on the back of its head, it's not really an eagle. It's a stylized, conventionalized phoenix. The phoenix is the Benu. It's the dying and resurrecting soul bird of Osiris in the mythology. So I'm at the train station in Washington, D.C., and if you go there and you look up, you'll see the whole top of the train station is lined with pagan gods. There's one that I didn't put in here, but on the left side, the quote sounds like, it sounds like a biblical thing. It says, behold, I put all things under his feet. But it's a Zeus. That's not what my scriptures say, but you look at the stuff, and that's on the left. When you go to the right, you see this right here. You see two pointy-headed eagles facing in opposite directions, and it says, between them, let all the ends thou aimst at be, thy countries, thy gods, and truths be noble, and the nobleness that lies in other men, sleeping but never dead, will rise in majesty to meet thine own. What is that all about? Well, I got two phoenix eagles right there. I was thinking about my time in the military. When I was in the Army, I was covered from head to toe with eagles. Eagles on our buttons, eagles on our patches, eagles on our shoes. Like eagles are everywhere, the American eagle. But, Manly P. Hall says there's another meaning behind that. And so while we were looking at all this stuff, there was something that I wanted to see, and I didn't know where it was. And we're driving down the road, and I looked between two buildings, and I saw two eagles perched atop pillars, one on each pillar, through this aisleway. I said, I don't know what that is, but let's go check it out. So I go down there, and this is what we find. A statue, this is in the National Harbor in Washington, D.C. A statue of a bearded god coming up out of the National Harbor. And the name of the statue is called The Awakening, which is right underneath the statue of two eagles looking down on it. I don't know, but this stuff is out there. And you got people, again, like Manly P. Hall saying, the dying God shall rise again. The secret room in the house of the hidden places shall be rediscovered. The pyramid, again, shall stand as the ideal emblem of solidarity, inspiration, aspiration, resurrection, and regeneration. This is in The Secret Teaching of All Ages, Manly P. Hall, page 44. We need to know our enemy. I showed a lot of stuff. I'm sorry it went long. I'm hoping that I'm equipping you with at least some things to go look into for yourselves. Because if we're to declare the end from the beginning, then I believe everything we need to know about the last days is given from us in the beginning days. If we want to have any understanding of Revelation, we got to go back to Genesis and work our way forward from there. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video presentation. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the video, and share it on your favorite social media sites. There's a lot more to come, so stay tuned and we'll see you back next time.